Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London, and it's a real pleasure for me to review this new biography of Marshall Hall. I attended the launch, which Sally Smith, Queen's Counsel, attended and spoke at with Sir Alan Moses. The book Marshall Hall, A Law Unto Himself, has just come out. It's been published by WILDY, Simmonds and Hill Publishing. It's a first-class statement on what was a really special guy. And I say that from the point of view of having read quite a lot about him and, of course, read the original work all those years ago from Marjoribanks. Now, I've given it the title, A Compassionate Man Who Will Remain Most Special to All Advocates and to the public and to the general public. And that's exactly what he is. Let's look at the book first of all. That's the review title. There's a picture of him, his nice top hat there. There is the spine, and then on the back there's a nice picture of him, a bit older. £25, it's an excellent book, it's a hardback. There's a foreword by Clive Anderson, as smart as ever is Clive. There's a nice picture of Sally. She's really put a lot of effort into this. She's a charming lady, and I really thank her very much for doing it. That's a statement of what the book is about on the inside dust cover. Now, there's a lot of information in this book. There's the index at the back. After the index, you've got all the sources and notes. Sally put a lot of effort into this. It took, I think it was, she said it was about 18 months. And it was a huge amount of work. You can see the notes, the sources and notes are set out. And she obviously, quite a lot of the papers, as she said, were destroyed after Edward Marjoribanks' biography was written, or they've disappeared. And she therefore was able to get hold of some new papers from the family. Now these are other papers. That was in fact a little bit of a shame, because Marjoribanks had concentrated to a certain extent on the actual notes that Marshall Hall had used for his cases, and I always thought that was very helpful from an advocate's point of view. There's a front cover. However, we've got a wonderful book here from Sally, and this is really something anybody who's an advocate should read. Now you can see he starts off the various parts, fame, and then so on, 300 pages worth. Some lovely illustrations. I can't show too many of them to you, but let's just have a quick look at some of them. You can see some of these pictures here, and slightly older. I've got to be a bit careful with showing all these photographs, but there we go, you've got those. And then earlier on you've got some other photographs, his parents for instance, and then various other nice pictures. He was a handsome man and had a wonderful speaking voice, of course, which is very, very important for an advocate. Now, there's some press cuttings, which I also thought very interesting, about some of the really serious trials. Then do read the foreword, because Sally sets a very 21st, oh sorry, that's Clive Anderson rather, sets a very clear 21st century opinion, if you like, on where we would see Marshall Hall today. And then after that, there is also, in addition, a useful, after Clive Anderson's statement, there's a preface which Sally has written, which actually I have taken part of what she said there and included a little bit of the quotes in, because she's written this. It's a very high quality read. It's a biography. It should appeal to a lot of people, not just ordinary lawyers, but a much wider field to boot. Criminologists, anybody involved in fact in this sort of area of interest, criminological, anybody who reads a newspaper, because he was such a big man at that particular time. Let me just say what I think about the book. I actually wrote it myself with chatting to Elizabeth, but this is what we've come up with. It's an important biography. It was a book about yesterday for today's readers, before everything changes with the way we do our legal business. It's quite possible that the art of the advocate will be modified again very rapidly in the 21st century as we see the creation of new ways to resolve disputes, with emphasis on the written word and online decisions. Now, however, Sir Edward Marshall Hall, and I'll call him Marshall Hall, or Marshall, that's what he was known as, will always remain top of the advocate's tree as a man who fitted into a particular part of our more recent legal history, during that winding down period of what was a particularly brutal and insensitive judicial past. And Sally Smith, Queen's Counsel, gives us the 21st century view of an Edwardian barrister, following on the seminal work from Edward Marjoribanks' book, which people, of course, of my vintage read as part of our legal studies decades ago. And I remember it. The book I had didn't look like the current versions at all, but I did like what he put in, because he did put the arguments in, the way in which Marshall had constructed his advocacy, because it is an art, let's face it. Counsel today are not, thankfully, viewed in the same way as they were in the early 20th century. Good job too. The bar has rightly moved away from its heavy newspaper emphasis on celebrity lawyers, although we have a few, into a different media age, although we do have a few, as I say, contemporary contenders, whom we all know and love, of course. No names. The bitchiness and the downright hostility and grudge holding which permeated the bar of the past are well documented in what is a thoughtful and well constructed new biography. Smith has not been constrained by sycophancy, which has been the problem of so many biographies in the past when the subjects are recently passed on. I don't mean to criticise Marjoribanks, but there were things that he couldn't really talk about at that time, and I'm being charitable. So we have a reasoned and meticulous analysis for 2016. That is not to say that Marjoribanks produced a work with only the good points covered, because he did not do that or ever have any intention of doing that. It certainly, I think, was a tribute to Marshall. Anyway, the work I think should be read, and that's Marjoribanks' work, for the excellent points of advocacy and the speech detail which were covered during Marshall's life, and that is the benefit for the advocate today. So you can do the same thing with Burkitt, but you can see the same way in which it comes out. Of course, Marjoribanks had to leave out certain matters which were known, sort of remain common knowledge about Marshall within the bar, but they made him the man he was, and what had happened to him was certainly tremendously influential on his life. And we have a better picture, I think, of Marshall today from what Sally has produced. I'm sure most judges are delighted that they don't have to sit through a modern-day Marshall Hall. If she or he, of course, could ever exist today, it's highly unlikely, as they would probably be disbarred, if not sent to Coventry pretty quickly. They tried some of the splendid devices Marshall used, which still work actually, but be very, very careful. It's not to be advised. I know that Mortimer came up with a few with Rumpole, but I think he pinched them in the first place. But that's all I'm going to say about John Mortimer. Not everyone can be such a good advocate, because one can't. But Marshall's life shows you can learn such an attribute or facility, but you have to experience it as well. Yes, experience does count, but the very frailty and vulnerability of the human condition makes the successful advocate that very special person who was needed at a time of judicial homicide, the massive public interest in capital trials. And I can't stress that too much. You have to have that special understanding, and it's not something you can really learn that much of. You can experience it. And you have an innate ability quite often. That's what I've seen with the great advocates I've come across. Fortunately, we can decline the services generally of a modern-day marshal, because the sanctions are all most moderate in comparison with his time, yet the crimes are just as gruesome. There's something about a capital trial which is always going to be different. And the nearest we get to it today, here in this country anyway, is the death sentence passed on a pet, non-human, unless one's actually represented parties in capital proceedings abroad. And I have actually attended those sorts of trial and found them profoundly different, difficult and very unsettling. One can reflect when reading Sally's exceptionally crafted account of Marshall's life why he was the way he was, irrespective of the outcome of his cases and those clients who lied to him. It has happened to all of us, of course, but I think he really didn't like it at all when he realised he'd been duped. And I've had the same problem, and I'm sure you have. But just bear in mind, you're not alone. There's always a bit of Marshall Hall in all of us of advocates. I think even today, when we are heavily constrained by what we can say and do. And that again is a shame, because the role of advocacy has dramatically changed. The recommendation, though, is that all budding advocates should ensure that they read this new, well-researched version of Marshall's life afresh, especially trainee lawyers at any level, because I think they will benefit. If he was nothing else, Marshall lives as a man with a warning about how we should do things in our forensic world, with care, meticulous planning and checking, relevant specific expertise, and the special flamboyance so often sneered at by some, both then and now. But it does work. And this book also works for modern counsel today, and should, I think, as I say, be compulsory reading for all lawyers and general readers in the future. I'm sure it will become very popular as a book. And Alan Moses certainly identified that in his excellent presentation and appreciation at the book launch at the Old Bailey last month. I'm recording this in the middle of 2016. Let me conclude by saying that final words are left to Sally Smith at the end of the 19 chapters, when she writes as follows, that, quote, Marshall was the ultimate exponent of total advocacy being the theme of Alan Moses' appreciation as well, something I didn't quite understand but now do. Total advocacy being the entire complexion, the range. She goes on, Marshall lived his entire life as though the world was one huge courtroom and its inhabitants a universal jury to beguile. He cared little or nothing for the restraints of his profession or for the discipline of the law. He introduced the concept of compassion into a legal system in which it was lacking. He was universally adored and trusted by those whom that system is meant to serve. He made speeches of such extraordinary power that they've lived on for more than a century, and more important of all, he saved many lives. No other lawyer could claim that. Now that is what Sally has written at the end of the book, and there's only one answer to that. Absolutely. Now let's just have a quick look at the book again. There it is, front, spine and back. It's a nice heavy book. I liked it. Nice paper as well. Thank you, Wildys. There's Sally, and there are the nice points in the index. A lot of detail in the index, not too much, but enough. You can find everything you want. And in fact, most people will probably know quite a lot about Marshall Hall anyway, because he has been the subject in terms of not fiction so much as faction, but certainly television programmes about his life and his cases. Jonathan Hyde starred in what, some years ago now. There is the list of illustrations again, a lot of information. And then how he started his life off. Then, of course, as I said, the photographs. Some interesting pictures there, which I've shown before. Then some other ones here. Just you get a feel. This is quite gruesome, this bit here. These are press cuttings. Frankly, some of his clients were really quite awful, putting it bluntly. But there again, when you're an advocate, you don't choose your clients. The Cabrac principle is there for a purpose. And whilst it's a long time ago since Marshall's passing, we still have that principle, and I hope we keep it. Thank you to Sally, thank you to Wildy, very much indeed. This is an excellent book. Go out and read it and get your friends to do so too. Bye-bye.